Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Apocrypha Apocalypse. I'm Gary Machuda, and it is Lent, the time when Christians focus and meditate on Christ's passion, death, and resurrection. And I want to do an episode which fits in with this Lenten theme. And I found a very interesting book. It's a book written by Peter Doble. It's called The Paradox of Salvation, Luke's Theology of the Cross. And here I have a copy of it. It's a little pricey, and warning for those who want to pick it up. This is an academic level book. Even I think a seminarian would have difficulty getting through it. Probably someone in graduate school wouldn't have a problem, but it is a pretty meaty book. And the thesis that he gives is that Luke, when he's describing Christ's passion, his sufferings, his death, and ultimately the resurrection, he does so using what he calls the dikaios model that's taken from Wisdom 2 through 5. And dikaios, by the way, just simply means the righteous man model. Fascinating thesis. And so I'm going to go over some of the things that Doble mentions in this book and argues for. Just another warning too, because I know our faithful opposition out there will do what I probably would do if I was in their shoes, and note that every possible text I brought up could be applied to other texts as well. But just fair warning that the case that we're going to lay out is really a big picture case. In other words, what he shows is that there are these lines of thought, word patterns, of ideas, of clusters, of allusions that all focus on this righteous man model as depicted in the Book of Wisdom, and that Luke, when he's describing the meaning of the cross, is drawing from the Book of Wisdom. Fascinating thesis. I think it's I think he's certainly onto this. And if anything, it gives us an opportunity to dive deep into the Word of God, which I'm always for. So we got a lot to go through today. So fasten your seatbelts, folks, because the Apocrypha Apocalypse begins right now. All right, I have to say that this particular video has been in the works for quite a while. Doble's work, put out by Cambridge University Press, fantastic work, very high scholarship, very dense to go through. It took me a while to get through the book myself, and then once I got through the book, I needed to distill it for the video, so I distilled the information there, then realized that even that is too dense, so I distilled it some more, reread the book, kept distilling, putting it down to its basic elements, which is this video. So, which is unfortunate because Doble does a lot of great work, and he deduces a lot more material than I will be able to in this video. I'm just going to give you the highlights pretty much. And there's a lot more to it, a lot more analysis. He does a very important analysis on distinctions like textual echoes and allusions, things like that. But anyway, I've distilled it down to something that I think would be really cool, because after all, it is Lent, and Lent is always a great time to reflect on the Passion. And since this is the Apocrypha Apocalypse, since Luke seems to be coloring the Passion narrative using paint drawn from the Wisdom of Solomon, chapters 2 through 4, and that's Doble's thesis, and specifically what he calls the righteous, or the dikaios model. This would be a great video to have. Now, I was very reticent to do this as a video on this channel because on this channel, we've been dealing with canonical issues. So we're looking at dependencies of text. We're looking at whether they have canonical weight, and it's largely argumentation. Doble's approach is very different, and I think it could very well be misunderstood by some of those out there who don't accept the Deuterocanon and are hypercritical about everything we put up. because it's a cumulative argument. And with cumulative arguments, it's made up of strands of individual layers of evidence. And each individual layer is easy to break. You could always point to echoes and allusions to other books besides wisdom. But what happens is, as each layer, as each strand is woven together, it becomes more and more difficult to break apart. In other words, what we see in Doble's work and the small summary of some of the things Doble brings up is a cluster, dense clusters of allusions and unique ideas being woven into his narrative about Christ's passion, death, and his idea of theology of the cross, in other words. Individually, they don't appear significant, but when you put them all together, you can see where it seems like it's following this model that we find in the wisdom of Solomon. So what is this wisdom of Solomon model? Well, basically, it's a model that's made up of various elements. And Doble points out that this righteous servant and servants that are portrayed in wisdom has elements of that, the claim to be the Son of God, the claim that God is his Father, the plotting of the ungodly opponents, a virtuous life crowned by endurance of a shameful death, and the glorious post-mortem vindication of the righteous. And by the way, I'd like to also point out that Wisdom 2 through 4 has an exemplar righteous man, and then it speaks about all the righteous. In Wisdom 2, there's a direct prophecy about an individual. Wisdom 3 and 4 talk about righteous people, okay, and their post-mortem vindication. So you have an exemplar, and then you have those who follow the exemplar. This, by the way, parallels a lot of messianic prophecies. For example, Book of Daniel, you find in the Book of Daniel the Son of Man prophecies, and then it talks about the saints, right? So you have the individual exemplar, and then you have the followers of the exemplar kind of sharing in the same kind of facets of the Son of Man. You even find this, by the way, in the suffering servant passages in Isaiah, where it talks about the people of Israel as God's servant, and then there's an individual servant that is mentioned as well. So messianic prophecies tend to have that duality of the exemplar, the Messiah, and then the followers of the Messiah who share in elements. Okay, that being said, let's look at these various layers. And like I said, each one is very thin, not super strong, and can be dismissed very easily. But what we're looking at is the big picture. Okay, the big picture. All right, the first one is Luke 23:47, which says,
"Now when the centurion saw what was done, he glorified God, saying, 'Certainly this was a righteous man.'"
Now this comes from the King James Bible. I'm using the King James just because it's very literal and it's helpful by and large. There's only a couple of things I would probably tweak. That's something unique that Luke brings. Now, you're probably thinking, hold on a second, that's not unique at all to Luke, because after all, the other synoptic gospels, Mark and Matthew, record essentially the same thing about the centurion and his friends. They all say, truly, this was the Son of God, right? So what's so unique? Well, notice that the Son of God is spoken in Mark and Matthew, but for Luke, it's not a reference to his divine sonship. It's a reference to him being righteous. And in the Greek, you can see there the word dikaios is used, which many translations translated as innocent, but it literally is righteous. Okay? Another interesting change in Luke that you don't find in the Matthew and Mark's account is the word truly. Now, the word truly, aletheia, is used in Mark and Matthew, and it means truly. Luke uses a different word, ontos. Now, ontos means truly, just like aletheia, but it's a different word. Now, that in and of itself doesn't seem significant, except Luke only uses it twice. He uses it here in regards to Christ's crucifixion, where the centurion declares him to be a righteous man, and again in Luke 24:34, when he talks about the resurrection. The word ontos, or truly, is used again, where it says, the Lord has risen indeed, that's truly, and hath appeared to Simon. So you kind of have bookends. You have the passion and death showing truly he's the righteous one. And then you have the other bookend with the vindication of the resurrection. And Luke uses that same word for truly, not aletheia, but ontos. Okay, again, pretty thin. But as we'll see, it's just one layer that if you put layer upon layer, what you find is this cluster that forms. In fact, our very next example is such a cluster. It has to do with the cluster of trials, kingdom, a reference to the Father, and judging. And so we go to Luke 22:28-30. And this is unique to Luke, although there is a similar passage in Matthew, and we'll look at that in a second. Luke 22:28-30 says,
Ye are they which have continued with me in my temptations. And I appoint unto you a kingdom, as my Father hath appointed unto me, that ye may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel.
So you can see here different elements or clusters of elements from wisdom, namely trials, kingdom, reference to my Father, and judging. Okay. Again, these are not super unique to wisdom. You can find the same elements all over the Proto-canon and Deuterocanon as well. But it's this cluster of these specific elements that is intriguing. Now, like I said, it's not quite a complete parallel, but it's very close in Matthew 19:28, which says,
Ye are they which have continued with me in my temptations. And I appoint unto you a kingdom, as my Father hath appointed unto me, that ye may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel.
Now you can see here where Luke has different elements that aren't found in Matthew. For example, in Matthew, it says that ye have followed me. There's no mention about trials, where the King James actually translates it temptations, but it's probably better understood as trials. Okay. It just says, you have followed me. In the regeneration of the Son of Man, you shall sit on the throne of his glory, and ye also will sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus, however, in Luke, incorporates the idea of a kingdom given to him by his Father. Okay, I have appointed unto you a kingdom, as my Father hath appointed unto me. So you have the insertion of this bestowal of a kingdom by my Father. And remember when we were talking about the dikaios model from wisdom, trials, claiming that God is your Father, that's part of the model. Okay. Then you have the shared elements. Actually, he talks about eating and drinking at the table in the kingdom. That's exclusively Luke. Sitting on thrones, that's shared with Matthew. And the idea of judging is also shared with Matthew. So you have those elements. Okay. Now, you also have the same elements present in wisdom as well. For example, in Wisdom 2:17, says, let us see if his words are true. Let us prove what shall happen in the end. And the word there is the same word used by Luke when Jesus says, you have continued with me in my temptations or trials. When it says, let us prove, it's the same word, as you can see here. Okay, so the wicked are testing or trying the just one. And Jesus says to his followers, you have stood with me during this testing. In Wisdom 3b, it says, having And having been a little chastised, he shall be greatly rewarded. For God proved them and found them worthy of himself. And again, that word translated proved is the same Greek word that's used in Luke 22:28 through 30. Okay, so you have this trial, this word that continues on and on. And of course, you find this elsewhere, for example, in the Lord's Prayer. He uses the same word that's often translated, in King James is translated as temptation, Luke 11:4, and so on and so forth. Also, the element of my Father, the reference to God being his Father, that's found in Wisdom 2:13. He professeth to have knowledge of God and calleth himself a child of the Lord. So he claims to be the child of God. And then more explicitly in Wisdom 2:16b, he pronounceth the end of the just to be blessed and maketh his boast that God is his Father, which is also part of that dikaios model, which isn't found in the synoptic gospels. In regards to judging and a kingdom, we find this also in Wisdom 3:8. They shall judge the nations and have dominion over people, and their Lord shall reign forever. And of course, here we have in Greek both judging and a kingdom as well. Now, this could be coincidence that it's only in Luke that you have a conjunction of all or most of these words, especially trials, reference to Father, kingdom, judging, and you can find that elsewhere, like we pointed out. But you have this cluster here. All of them are found in wisdom. Moving on, we look at the Sanhedrin's decision about Jesus. This is very interesting. Luke 22:66 through 71. It says this.
And as soon as it was day, the elders of the people and the chief priests and the scribes came together, and led him into their council, saying, Art thou the Christ? Tell us. And he said unto them, If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I also ask you, you will not answer me, nor let me go. Hereafter shall the Son of Man sit on the right hand of the power of God. Then said they all, Art thou then the Son of God? And he said unto them, Ye say that I am. And they said, What need we any further witness? For we ourselves have heard of his own mouth.
Now, when we compare this to the synoptics, like Mark 14:61 through 64, and Matthew 26:63 through 66, you find that he splits the terms Messiah and Son of God. And he does so that he can place emphasis on the idea of Christ claiming to be Son of God. So that when Christ affirms that he is the Son of God, it's that affirmation that is immediately followed by the high priest, who says, What further need do we have of witnesses? For we have heard from his own mouth, right? And then he passes judgment. Now, in the other accounts, for example, in Mark, you don't have that. Rather, Mark compresses it.
Again the high priest asked him, and said unto him, Art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And ye shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power, and coming in the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest rent his clothes, and saith, What need we any further witnesses? Ye have heard the blasphemy, what think ye? And they all condemned him to be guilty of death.
And unites both the claim to be the Messiah and the Son of God together. And then he says, You'll see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming in the clouds of heaven. And at that, the high priest rent his robes and saith, What need have we of further witnesses? Right? In Matthew's account, 26:63 through 66, it says,
But Jesus held his peace. And the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus saith unto him, Thou hast said. Nevertheless I say unto you, Hereafter shall you see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power, and coming in the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest rent his clothes, saying, He hath spoken blasphemy, what further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now ye have heard his blasphemy. What think ye? They answered and said, He is guilty of death.
So in the other two accounts, in Mark and Matthew, Messiah and Son of God are combined so that you don't have the Son of God being singled out like you have in Luke. Okay. And therefore, the high priest passes sentence right after Jesus speaks about the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power. So that is what the trigger is. So Luke's account, he recounts it in a way so as to highlight Christ's claim to be the Son of God. And that seems to be the trigger in verse 70. So you have to ask yourself, why, Luke, when you're recounting the scene in front of the Sanhedrin, why did you split them so as to kind of single out the claim of divine sonship to be the Son of God as the reason for the condemnation, where the other ones, it's the claim to be the Son of Man who's going to sit at the right hand of the Father? Well, again, the claim to be God's Son is part of that righteous man model found in wisdom.
Let us see if his words be true, and let us prove what shall happen in the end of him. For if the just man be the Son of God, he will help him, and deliver him from the hand of his enemies.
Matthew also sees Christ's claim to be the Son of God as the ultimate reason for the passion and death of Christ. Only he doesn't do it in the synagogue, or the Sanhedrin, I should say. Rather, he does it at the cross. In Matthew 27:43, the chief priests, scribes, and elders say, basically, let's see if God rescues him, for he said, I am the Son of God. And if you guys are subscribers to this channel, you know I believe this text shows canonical weight for wisdom. It's being used as a prophecy here in Matthew 27:43. So you have both Matthew and Luke finding wisdom to be canonical and prophetic in a way. Okay, so that's one layer. Let's move on to another layer, and that is the issue of entrapment. Now, if you look at Luke 11:53-54, it reads as follows.
And as he said these things unto them, the scribes and the Pharisees began to urge him vehemently, and to provoke him to speak of many things, laying wait for him, and seeking to catch something out of his mouth, that they might accuse him.
And as you can see in the highlighted term here in verse 4, that particular Greek word is important. Why? Because in parallel accounts, such as in Matthew 22:15, which reads, Then went the Pharisees and took counsel of how they might entangle him in his talk. And also Mark 12:13, it says, And they sent unto him certain Pharisees and of the Herodians to catch him in his words. In these two passages, it's different Greek words, as you can see right here, that are highlighted. Luke uses a specific word for lying in wait. Why is that significant? Well, it is a term found all places, Wisdom 2:12, which says, quote,
Therefore let us lie in wait for the righteous, because he is not for our turn, and he is clean contrary to our doings. He upbraideth us with our offending the law, and objecteth to our infamy the transgressings of our education.
And here you can say it's the same Greek word used in Luke. So interesting. Now it's a little weak. It's not something that's very specific to wisdom, but it seems to be specific to Luke. So that's another layer where you see a connection with wisdom too. Now, moving on to the Transfiguration. Luke's account for the Transfiguration differs only slightly than the other accounts, but it's interesting that the parts that he differs also points to this dikaios, so righteous man's model, as found in Wisdom 2-5. For example, in Luke 9:31, talking about Moses and Elijah, it says, who appeared in glory and spoke of his exodus, which he was going to accomplish in Jerusalem. So the other accounts don't give what Jesus was talking about with these two individuals. Only Luke does. And he uses an odd term to describe what Jesus is going to do. He's going to perform an exodus in Jerusalem. What is the exodus he's going to perform in Jerusalem? Well, the passion, the crucifixion, right? That's going to occur in Jerusalem. Interesting enough, the word exodus is used in that kind of sense of, for example, in Wisdom 3:1-3, it says, quote,
But the souls of the righteous are in the hand of God, and there shall no torment touch them. In the sight of the unwise they seem to die, and their departure is taken for misery, and their going from us to be utter destruction, but they are in peace.
The word departure there, as you can see in the Greek, is exodus, the same word exodon, different form in Luke. So exodus is used as the departing of the righteous, or the death of the righteous, I should say. So you have this peculiar use of the word exodus in the Transfiguration for Christ's death that you also find in the Book of Wisdom. Another subtle change that Luke has to do with the words of the voice that comes from the clouds. And here I'll show you the parallel accounts. Both Matthew 17:5 and Mark 9:7 both speak of the voice saying, "This is my beloved son," ho agapetos. Luke, on the other hand, says that it says, "This is my chosen son, listen to him." And so he uses the word which could be translated the elect or the chosen. Okay. So different word being used in Luke. And so the Father's voice concerning his son is that he's elect, he's chosen. That in and of itself probably wouldn't raise an eyebrow, except that yet we have another connection with wisdom. In Wisdom 4:14-15, it speaks of the righteous, saying,
For his soul was pleasing to the Lord, therefore he took him quickly from the midst of wickedness. Yet the people saw and did not understand, nor take such a thing to heart, that God's grace and mercy are with his elect, and he watches over his holy ones.
The word there, his elect, is the same word, different form for Jesus. Okay, so here you have some modifications within the Transfiguration, again, which points to Christ's death and passion, using ideas, these cluster ideas from the Book of Wisdom. You also have another thing that squares with wisdom. This is found in Luke 23:34. By the way, this passage is only found in Luke. It's a logion, and it's a parenthetical remark. It says, Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. They divide his garments and by casting lots. This idea of not knowing what they do. Okay, so first you have a reference to Father. Again, the righteous one claims that God is his Father. That's one of the reasons why the wicked persecute him. And here you have a prayer, Father, forgive them. Why? Because they're ignorant. They don't know what they are doing. Oh, why is that important? Well, again, this is another line that goes back to Wisdom 2:12. Again, notice the cluster of ideas centered in wisdom that's also centered in Luke's passion account. In Wisdom 2:12, it speaks of the wicked saying, as for the mysteries of God, they knew them not. Neither hoped they for the wages of righteousness, nor discerned the reward of blameless souls. Again, you have this idea of not knowing. Okay. So this idea of Christ's persecutors being ignorant of the plan of God and cooperating in in this odd way is not only consigned there in this short logion by Luke, but you find it in other places in Acts as well. For example, in Acts 13:27, the inhabitants of Jerusalem and their leaders failed to recognize him. Also in Acts 3:17, now I know, brothers, that you acted out of ignorance. You didn't know. Okay. So this idea of the persecutors of the righteous doing so because they didn't understand the mysteries of God. You find that in Wisdom 2. You also find it in Luke and Acts as well. Also, we have Christ's final words on the cross. In Luke's account, in Luke 23:46 through 47, it says,
And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit, and having said thus, he gave up the ghost. Now when the centurion saw what was done, he glorified God, saying, Certainly this was a righteous man.
Now Jesus here is quoting from Psalm 31:6. And as you can see right here, Psalm 31:6 reads, Into your hands I commend my spirit. You will redeem me, Lord, faithful God. Okay. There is an assertion of the word Father by Luke. Now, obviously, Jesus is addressing this psalm to the Father, so it's certainly implied. Or Jesus could literally say, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. So he accommodates the psalm to his death on the cross. But remember, Father is one of those components that's found within the dikaios model. Now, again, other passages in Scripture speak about God as Father, but it's this cluster idea that, it's specifically there. Also, the idea of that the psalm says that into your hands, into the Father's hands, he commends his spirit. This is also in Wisdom as well. In fact, in Wisdom 3:1, famous quote from Wisdom, but the souls of the just are in the hands of God. So you have here Psalms kind of encroaching a little bit on Wisdom 3 territory. And then with Luke adding Father, you have this kind of conjunction of Psalms and Wisdom 2 at work in Jesus's words on the cross. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. And who in wisdom is in the hands of the Father? The just, the righteous, the dikaios. Okay, fairly weak, right? But the very next verse is what we talked about at the beginning of this video. Verse 47 says, and when the centurion saw what was done, he glorified God, saying, certainly, again, that word that Luke only uses for this moment and also for the truthfulness that Christ has truly been raised, the vindication of what occurs in the cross, that the just one is vindicated by God's deliverance in the resurrection. You have that right there. This man was righteous, dikaios. So you have that connection of the souls of the just are in the hands of God. And when he says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit, the centurion responds, this certainly is a righteous man. Wow. So you have a whole confluence of different texts into one. And again, I want to emphasize, as I've done throughout this video, you could take this piece by piece, you can break each of the strings, show that it's multiple text and so on. But the thing is, where does the cluster center on, right? Yes, other texts use similar words, other texts have certain themes, but you can see a confluence of themes drawn directly from wisdom 2, 3, and 4, and Luke applying it specifically for the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ. So, okay, this was a long, tedious video, but I find it interesting. It's a different kind of methodology, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of pushback on the methodology. And quite frankly, any faults is entirely my own, because like I said, Peter Doble does a very good scholarly work working through all the details, alternative explanations, and text that I didn't bring into this discussion. He does in his book. So it's kind of, a very, very scaled down model of Doble's approach. But nevertheless, hopefully, if anything, it gives you more reasons to meditate, pray, read scripture, dive into the details between Christ's passion, death, and resurrection, and also prayerfully read Wisdom 2 as well. All right. I hope everybody enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe, leave a comment, do the thumbs up. All that stuff helps the algorithm. Also, if you'd like to support William Albrecht and myself, Doble's book's expensive, and it's been made possible through your generous donations on Patreon. So thank you, everybody. Until next time, I'm Gary Machuda. Have a great week. Bye-bye.